The sources of power in Iran within the Islamic Republic are changing very fast. And if we want to make sense of what's about to happen, it's very important to understand who has the upper hand right now and how that might change in the near future. Most people following what's happening in Iran are familiar with Mujtaba Khamenei as the supreme leader and Ghalibaf as the main negotiator of the Islamic Republic when it comes to dealing with the Americans, at least so far. But if you want to have a better understanding of what's happening behind the scenes and the internal power struggle right now happening within the Islamic Republic, pay attention to this, because if you understand this, then you will be able to make sense of what the Islamic Republic is dealing with, the internal civil war, and their reasoning behind many of their actions. The names we want to go through to understand this is Ghalibaf, Vahidi, and Jalili. And these people's relation with Mujtaba Khamenei, the way people traditionally try to make sense of Islamic Republic politics is to divide the Islamic Republic between hardliners and moderates, which is a very inaccurate way of looking at it. But all of the three people that I just mentioned to you will traditionally fit under the hardliner category based on how other people looked at the Islamic Republic power dynamics. And the people who are usually considered to be reformer or moderate, which they're not, but that's how people look at them, people like Rouhani, Khatami, and Zarif, you can notice that I'm not even including them because those people have completely been sidelined. So the power struggle and the division right now are between people who traditionally would be seen as hardliners. All of these three names that I mentioned to you, Ghalibaf, Vahidi, and Jalili, are all within the so-called hardliner category. Again, a more accurate version of looking at the division is more pragmatic hardliners versus more end of times revolutionary mind hardliners, but all of them are hardliners. But now, even within the people revolutionary minded hardliners, there's even division among that. Within these three people, Ghalibaf, who is considered to be not one of those so-called moderates or reformers, is now within these three people is considered to be the most pragmatic one, the one who's trying to be the most flexible to the Americans as a way to try to get a deal. Vahidi is the head of IRGC, and Jalili is part of the Paydari camp and also a member of the Supreme National Security Council. But let's talk about these three people, figure out what their agenda is, where are they on the pragmatic, revolutionary, jihadi spectrum, and what are their sources of power and what do they have against the other camp. Ghalibaf is considered to be the most pragmatic, flexible among these people, especially because he has historically always shown to be more self-interested. He's motivated by self-interest. He's a power-hungry person that uses the jihadi, revolutionary Islamic narrative as a tool rather than a goal, and his history demonstrates that. And right now, in my opinion, his main agenda is to stay alive, because that would be the most rational position to have, given that the people before him were taken out every time there was military operations. For him, the negotiation and the ceasefire is essential for him to stay alive, because he is very likely to be the next on the kill list if the negotiations or the ceasefire fail, or if we go back to military operations. That's Ghalibaf. And his source of power when it comes to military power and soft power, his military power comes from the fact that he used to be IRGC, he's still connected to the IRGC, and he has his own camp within IRGC. So that is his military power. His soft power comes from his own Ghalibaf camp among the people who are loyal to him. There's not that many, but they do exist. But his main soft power recently had came from him being able to put out statements on Mujtaba Khamenei's behalf, him somehow managing to cause statements being put out by Mujtaba Khamenei either actually being really approved by Mujtaba or somebody making it seem like Mujtaba has made those statements, but these are statements saying that the negotiations have been approved by Mujtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader, and that the ceasefire has been approved by Mujtaba Khamenei, and that Ghalibaf had Mujtaba Khamenei's blessing to go and do the negotiations. Those statements, either fake or real, by Mujtaba Khamenei initially made it so that people couldn't really challenge him. And we already saw that's not going to last long, and we were right about that. Those statements made it so that so many people who are more jihadi revolutionary minded couldn't be that aggressive when it comes to attacking him. Remember, Mujtaba doesn't have as much of an influence as his father, even if he was healthy and alive and present. His influence right now is much less because he doesn't have his father's charisma, he doesn't have his speaking skills, he hasn't been giving speeches, so he doesn't have that much of a loyal following. But more than that, he's absent even right now. It's really hard to use him as a way to increase someone's credibility and political capital, but he is still the supreme leader. If you put those statements out there, it will have some effect at the beginning until some people get brave enough to challenge it. And the challenging of that statement from Mujtaba Khamenei at first would be in the form of, how do we even know this is Mujtaba? Like, we're not seeing him speaking. And people who want to challenge Ghalibaf's position within the Islamic Republic will at first be motivated to maybe suggest that this is not Mujtaba speaking. But I suspect going forward, we're going to see more people even challenging Mujtaba, even if he did say those things, because Mujtaba's influence is much less than his father. So I expect some people who are more jihadi minded at some point, more durka, as we say, to challenge Mujtaba directly at some point if this keeps going. But this is Ghalibaf's position. Those are his sources of power. And that power is now demonstrating to be not enough compared to the second person we want to talk about, which is Vahidi. Vahidi has less soft power, which is now increasing, but his main source of power is that he's the head of IRGC. So the military power that he has is a lot. And his source of soft power comes from regime supporters, the minority regime supporters in Iran, having a very positive feeling towards the armed forces, right? So the regime supporters, their understanding is that the armed forces are the good people within the Islamic Republic, and the politicians are the ones who usually screw it up. And it's the military, especially the IRGC, that they have support and love. And the politicians are the ones who constantly ruin all the achievements of the IRGC. So Vahidi, just by being IRGC, will benefit from that support of regime supporters just because he's a military man rather than a politician. So he enjoys some soft power. He's not somebody that has been like publicly seen on state TV and other places. That helps and hurts at the same time. Hurting is that people don't really have that connection with you because you haven't been that present, but also many people who have been present on state TV, people have found things that they disagree with them. So sometimes that hurts more than it helps. Those are his sources of power. He is the strongest person right now within the Islamic Republic when it comes to military strength. When it comes to soft power, he has that going for him. But now also, it seems that statements coming from Mujtaba Khamenei, or statements that they claim coming from Mujtaba Khamenei, seems to suggest that Vahidi now has the upper hand when it comes to controlling or claiming what Mujtaba is saying. Because the statements coming from Mujtaba now are more against negotiations or flexibility towards Americans, which means that the puppet that is Mujtaba Khamenei or Mujtaba Khamenei's body, I don't know, but if he is alive, that puppet is now being taken away from the Ghalibaf camp, and it's now Vahidi who is in control of what we get to say Mujtaba is saying. And that gives Vahidi the soft power that he was lacking. And this might explain why Ghalibaf is now being pushed aside to some extent. Again, Ghalibaf might have a comeback if the economic pressure on the Islamic Republic gets too difficult to tolerate even for IRGC. They might have Ghalibaf to have a comeback. It's interesting because Ghalibaf's role is getting closer and closer to the role that the so-called reformers used to have, like the Rouhani camp and the Khatami camp. Ghalibaf is now doing the same. His utility is getting now closer to what they used to be. That's Vahidi as the head of IRGC. But now let's talk about Jalili, because this is where things get interesting. Jalili is part of the Paydari camp, which means that these people are the most radical, the most revolutionary minded, the most hardcore group of people within the Islamic Republic. Other people within this camp are people like Sabiti, Nabavian, Mahsuli, and Mir Bagheri as their spiritual leader. These are people who are more hardline than even the Khamenei camp. I already explained to you how these people think and how they are actually on average more radical than even the average within the Islamic Republic. And some of these people don't think the Islamic Republic is Islamic enough. Again, that's a conversation for another day. But the most important person within this camp is Jalili. The problem with Jalili and the entire Paydari camp has is that they don't have that much of a military strength. So Ghalibaf has some IRGC influence. Vahidi has the maximum IRGC control and influence, meaning that he has the most control over military power. In these three people, Jalili will have the least military power. However, what Jalili has is he represents a set of values and goals and ideas that represents what the regime supporters within the Islamic Republic want. When it comes to politicians, at least, most of the politicians have disappointed regime supporters. And now without Ali Khamenei trying to keep everything together and keep them united to some extent, without Ali Khamenei's presence, the regime supporters get to be more public and more aggressive with their most radical demands, which is represented best by the Jalili camp, by the Paydari camp, and the people closer to Jalili. That means that the Paydari camp and people like Jalili, among politicians, have the highest soft power, and asking for the maximum, asking for the most radical things, asking for the least flexible positions against the Americans, and demanding the absolute destruction of America and Israel, and the most hardline positions, is making them able to attract more and more pro-regime Iranians towards their side. In my opinion, the greatest threat for people like Vahidi, because Ghalibaf is controllable, okay? He doesn't have enough military power for him to be a threat to Vahidi, and he doesn't have enough soft power. He's not popular enough to challenge him by gaining more support from pro-regime people. The only chance that Ghalibaf had was to use Mujtaba as a way to gain support. But Vahidi seems to have been taking that away from him. But Jalili, on the other hand, he's more extreme than even the head of the IRGC. And he's a better reflection of what regime supporters want. The regime supporters have become more and more extreme, and this has been by design, and their radical ways were used by the regime. The so-called reformers were one leverage by Ali Khamenei, that he used them when he needed them. And the more radical regime supporters were also a weapon by Ali Khamenei, and he used them when he needed them. But he also had enough power over them to be able to pull them back and make them calm down when he needed them. But now Ali Khamenei is not there to pull them back, to pull the leash when he needs that. So they're getting more and more extreme. They have always been this extreme, but there's nobody there to silence them and stop them for making the most extreme demands. And this makes people like Jalili, who are even more extreme than people like Khamenei, to be able to now take advantage of the fact that he represents pro-regime people more than anyone else within the politicians within the Islamic Republic. Here's how people like Jalili and other people like him are becoming more and more influential. Other than the fact that Ali Khamenei is not there anymore to hold them back, it's also interesting how the street demonstrations for the past 2 months has now created an army, not an armed army, but a people's army, a minority of the people, may I add, a people's army for Jalili. Let me explain. Over the past 2 months, the Islamic Republic has brought pro-regime people into the streets every day for street protests in support of the regime as a way to avoid an uprising of the Iranian people against the regime. We have the vast majority of the Iranian people who are anti-regime. We have, let's say, a 5% of Iranians who are pro-regime. Again, let's just say it's 5%. The Islamic Republic right now based on the data that they have and the information that they have gathered, is that the risk of an uprising against the regime is very, very high. And also their assessment is that they might not be able to suppress it the next time an uprising happens. So they came up with this idea, and it's actually a smart idea, is to just have continuous pro-regime protests every day in the streets of Iran by pro-regime people. And they just get them to continue occupying the streets. And that has been very effective. And they have used many different ways to encourage pro-regime peoples to come into the streets and stay in the streets. I won't go through the list of ways that they have done that, but one of them, which is relevant to our discussion right now, is to tell them that they are the reason why the regime is standing. Their street demonstrations has saved the regime. And that is a motivating factor to them, but at the same time, it has made them more demanding because they now give themselves credit for defending the regime and being the reason for its survival. From their perspective, the regime owes them. The regime has to listen to them, and the regime has to give in to their demands, which includes no negotiations with the Americans, no capitulating to the Americans, and maximum aggression towards Americans and Israelis and all of that, which will make the Islamic Republic a lot less flexible if you wanted to give in to their demand, right? People like Jalili, they might not have as much of an influence within IRGC, but now the people in the streets are their army. They have created their position, and their demands are aligned more with the Paydari camp. By creating these street demonstrations, what you have done is that you have empowered the most radical parts of the population. And by doing that, you have given the Paydari camp and people like Jalili a lot more power, soft power, in a form of an army. People like Vahidi, even though they are a lot less flexible than Ghalibaf when it comes to negotiations, even though that is true, they still would like to have that option, because at some point we might get to a situation where even people like Vahidi have to admit that everything is going to break apart if they're not more flexible, or if they're at least not capitulating in some areas to the Americans. Because remember, the situation that the Islamic Republic is in has made Ghalibaf sound more like the so-called reformers. If the situation gets even worse, at some point you might see Vahidi even taking positions that are more like the so-called reformers. Because at the end of the day, if you are running out of revenue, you might decide that I need to be able to choose some options that remove some of this pressure on the Islamic Republic. Vahidi should be smart enough to know that the Jalili position will make them too limited. They will have less maneuverability. It doesn't make sense to go that extreme, to give in to that level of rigidness, right? You could expect at some point to see some tensions between the Vahidi camp and the Jalili camp as well. That might happen if the blockade really works. The Islamic Republic gets closer and closer to an economic collapse. Let's look at the ways that these two camps could actually take positions against each other, because this would be a division at the highest levels. And if you want to simplify it, this would be a division between IRGC and pro-regime Iranians. The Jalili would be the representation of the base of support for the Islamic Republic, and Vahidi would be the armed forces. And if we see a division there, that would be a division at a level that we have never seen before. And we are seeing some signs of it already. Vahidi's soft power right now comes from him being a military man and that being popular, but also him now having control over what Mujtaba says. So it's interesting to see that Jalili had attempted to challenge that. Because remember, among these three people, Ghalibaf, Vahidi, and Jalili, it has only been Ghalibaf and Vahidi who had managed to use Mujtaba as a source of power. And Jalili doesn't have access to that. Jalili is not in a position to make statements on Mujtaba's behalf or have control over what Mujtaba says. But it's interesting to see that Jalili just recently came out and questioned if this is actually even Mujtaba. Look at this. This was reported by Iran International. Jalili himself appeared to escalate tensions when he called upon Mujtaba Khamenei to clarify publicly whether ongoing actions reflected his directives. This was the first important person within the Islamic Republic that actually challenge the idea that these statements are actually Mujtaba statements. And this is more than just skepticism. Based on everything I told you, you could see how somebody like Jalili would be motivated to question that because he doesn't get to use that. So it then continues saying, in a now deleted post, he wrote that if no such message was issued, there is 100% a sedition of officials, and all these statements are written by the coup plotter himself. So most people assume that the coup plotter here is Ghalibaf. By the way, the IRGC is also responding to all of this. News outlets like Tasneem News, which is IRGC linked, had already published an article suggesting that the 10-point framework that they had, the red lines for the United States, was too rigid and delusional, which was quite a statement because those delusional red lines apparently came from Mujtaba Khamenei, but they took it back. But Tasneem got attacked so much that they actually removed that article. But then they responded, Tasneem News responded very aggressively in an unusually sharp tone, accusing the people who were attacking them as inciting division and acting against national security. This is what people do within Islamic Republic whenever they're being attacked. They always say that, oh, you're causing division by attacking us and you're probably with the enemy. And that's actually exactly what Tasneem News did. Look, it said that the outlet, the people who were criticizing Tasneem News, they were seeking to complete Trump's project in Iran. So yeah, if you criticize us, you're with the enemy. So they were criticizing Mujtaba's 10-point framework, and now the people who are attacking them, Tasneem is saying, you're with Trump. And they also noted that some individuals had recently been arrested over suspicious movements to undermine sacred unity. This is escalating because we have some people who think that they're the most Islamic and criticizing elements within the regime, even IRGC-linked elements within the regime, of you guys being too eager to negotiate and capitulate to the Americans, and accusing them of being American and Zionist spies or infiltrators. And now the IRGC-linked outlets are basically responding with the same type of accusation, saying that you're with Trump, you're the infiltrators, and also threatening them with arrest, which brings us back to the IRGC's power that Jalili doesn't have, which is military power. These more hardline, radical, jihadi-minded people, they might come out and call out the IRGC at some point, even more in the future, and maybe bring attention to whether or not Mujtaba has been saying these statements, and at some point maybe even criticize Mujtaba indirectly, at first maybe. But again, the IRGC can just arrest them. But that would be a huge escalation, because that would be the IRGC turning against pro-regime supporters. And if that happens, that means that the IRGC has now decided to suppress not just the anti-regime Iranian people, but also the pro-regime Iranian people. And this would be the IRGC abandoning, relying on soft power and relying more on its military power. If the radical regime supporters become too annoying and too limiting on the positions that the IRGC can take, then at some point they might just shut it down and be like, this is how it is. And anybody who pushes back against us is the enemy, and we're just going to deal with them in the same way that we have been dealing with the anti-regime Iranian people. Think about it. This language that I just read, suspicious movements to undermine sacred unity, that's the language that the Islamic Republic usually uses to threaten the anti-regime Iranian people. But this language is now being used to threaten the pro-regime Iranian people. I hope this gives you a better understanding. If you want to come ask questions about anything I just said or any other topic, come join our discussion group. The link is below. I'm there almost every day. In our discussion group, by the way, we discuss all things political related. It's not just Iran. If you're interested in a community where we discuss politics, come over there, and there's a lot of interesting people there to talk to. I hope I see you guys there. In the comment sections, let me know if this was helpful, if this was interesting, if this was educational. Those comments really help me get motivated to make more videos. My name is Armin Navabi. I'm Israel Chai. Long live America. Javid Shah, Paydari.